be able to join us a little bit later this evening, so I'm going to do my best with his portion. So the reminders that Neil would ordinarily give us are the reminders of the 4 agreements to courageous conversation, which are stay engaged, expect and experience discomfort, speak your truth, and expect and accept a lack of closure. Okay, so those items shouldn't frighten anyone this evening. This conversation will be recorded. I already started that. It will be available shortly after the end of this meeting on Community Action's YouTube channel, as well as YWCA Rock County's YouTube channel. So please do feel free to visit either or both of those channels and share the link for this recording for anyone who may have missed it, wasn't able to join us this evening. Parts of this conversation may be recorded and used by media outlets. So just want to make everyone aware that is a possibility, and you can kind of govern yourselves accordingly. And one other reminder is the YWCA and Diversity Action Team of Rock County are both nonpartisan. Community Action of Rock and Walworth counties are apolitical. And our final announcement for the evening is that our partner organizations, so YWCA Rock County Diversity Action Team and Community Action, will have announcements as we wrap this program. Any other organizations or individuals who are in the meeting who would like to give announcements for things that are going on in the community, you are welcome to do so, beginning at 7:30 or at 7 when we open the parking lot. That stays open as late as 7:30, but if there's not much discussion happening, we may wrap that a little early. All right. So I'm so excited. This evening, we have a special guest, which I will introduce her shortly. As you know, our topic this evening is the unequal impact of climate disaster. We're going to start with a very short video. It's a minute and just over 20 seconds long. After we watch that video, I have one question for you. So we'll discuss that a little bit, and then we will move right along to hearing from our guest speaker.
It seems like she's frozen. No, she's not. Amy, there's no video. Okay.
I just ended the video. All right. Fran, I see you have your hand up. I will get to you in just a second. So my question is, what would happen if aid after a natural disaster was distributed based on need, if that was the primary factor for distribution? Fran, your hand was up. Please go ahead and share.
I'm sorry, that was just because I couldn't see anything.
Oh, okay. Okay.
There was no video, Amy.
Thank you, Santo. All right, I will see if we can solve that glitch for the next video. But the question, after a natural disaster, was based on need. Feel free to put a question mark in the chat. And I'll put the link to that video in the chat as well. It's really short, so hopefully you have a few minutes after we conclude to watch that. So I'll repeat the question again. A natural disaster just hit. It impacted several neighborhoods in our community. And you may have the very natural opinion that I want service restored. I want whatever that thing is that you are in need of. But what if the distribution of aid was based on need? So not based on affluence, not based on property value, not based on the loudest voices or who knew powerful people. What if aid distribution after a natural disaster was based off of need?
Amy, Steve Howland, I don't think any of us saw the video, so responding to the question becomes difficult, other than to say, I would assume that it would be based on need rather than affluence, but I would also assume that too often it isn't. So we wish that it would, but difficult to respond without seeing the video.
Well, actually, it's two separate things. I would have loved for you to see the video, but the question kind of stands alone. I hate that you didn't see it. I'll get that in the link for you. But the question is the question. So if multiple parts of our community were hit by a national disaster, would you be okay if you were told that you have to wait before you receive aid because you don't have the greatest need? Would that sit well with you?
I would hope that I would deal with it appropriately in terms of showing some patience. But once again, when people are in crisis, it's me now. And so that's just a difficult thing to balance, especially when you have a ton of me now in desperate need. Yeah.
No, Steve, I appreciate your honesty. Do you mind if I ask you a follow-up question?
Go ahead, sure.
Oh, thank you. Would you, or are you able to elaborate, please, on deal with that appropriately? What do you believe that looks like? So hearing that, Steve, I'm very sorry that you lost property and potentially your home, et cetera. But we have prioritized this other neighborhood before you because they have been identified as having a greater need. How would, and this is all hypothetical, dealing with that appropriately, what might that look like?
Being able to try to find other resources to deal with the immediate crisis, depending on how, are there medical issues I have to respond to, and where would I go for those? Is the electricity on or isn't it on? Do I have water and sewer or not? What do I have to do? If I need to flush the toilets, do I have to go down to Turtle Creek to get a pail to be able to do it? Okay, I'm willing to try to do that as much as possible for as long as possible. And hopefully not be too impatient with city or state or county or national officials that are responding, but trying to keep as even a temper as possible so that people don't start rioting and get out of hand.
Steve, I think that was a beautiful way to expound on the question that I did not share with you ahead of time. So thank you so much for that. So I just wanted to frame our discussion. And again, I apologize you weren't able to view that video. I did put the link in the chat. So please do watch that as you are able after our meeting. We are so excited to welcome Maritha Blanchard. Maritha is with the American Red Cross out of Madison. She's with the Regional Disaster Office, and she's going to offer us a local perspective to what disaster response looks like. So Maritha, I'm going to mute myself. I made you a co-host in case you need to share the screen, your screen, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. Well, thank you everybody for inviting me to be part of the conversation tonight. As Amy said, I'm Maritha Blanchard. I'm the Regional Disaster Officer for the Wisconsin region of the American Red Cross. Based out of Madison, I live in Oregon, so I'm not too far away from a lot of you. I have been with the Red Cross for 17 years now. In disaster response. Previous to that, I worked in social services with Salvation Army. Kind of got into the disaster business after Hurricane Katrina. I saw that, experienced that as probably many of you did, that those feelings of I want to do something, I want to help. And saw a few months afterwards posting for a position with the American Red Cross doing disaster work, and threw my name in and have been doing that ever since. Most of what I do on a day-to-day basis is volunteer management, staff management, kind of that administrative side of things to make sure that our services are provided throughout the Wisconsin region. But I do deploy locally within Wisconsin and help support disaster response. But I've also done national disasters, including several hurricanes, Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Maria in the US Virgin Islands, Hurricane Harvey. I was in Texas for a month following that. Actually done several different hurricanes down in Texas, San Diego wildfires quite a many years ago. The 2008 Wisconsin floods was probably our biggest disaster that we've had in kind of recent history or my history doing disaster response. Also just a lot of small disasters, kind of the quiet disasters that if anything, they get a very short, single blip on the news that, a fire has destroyed a house in this community and now people are displaced. Also tornadoes, floods, other disasters, mass casualty events. Unfortunately, all too often we're experiencing those across the country, including in Wisconsin. So a little bit of experience across numerous different disaster kind of venues and disaster types. So I am going to pull up and share a screen. I've got a few slides just to kind of give you something other than my face to look at while I'm chatting here. And let's see if I can make this work. I want to share. Okay, Amy, can you confirm, are you seeing the Courageous Conversations?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, wonderful. So a little bit about, kind of what I can really speak to is the local stuff. That is my daily kind of bread and butter. That is what I do in and out. I've got some obviously experience with the national disasters, but I'm not a policy person for the Red Cross. I don't direct, our large scale disaster response efforts. When it comes to those big disasters, I am head out and deploy and help how I can. So for anybody who is not familiar with the American Red Cross, just a brief overview of what we do. Our mission statement's that top bullet point there. We try to prevent and alleviate human suffering, and that comes in many different forms. The thing that most people, when they first think about the Red Cross, if they don't think about disaster response, they think about blood, and that we are one of the nation's large blood collection organizations, and testing blood, distributing blood to hospitals and clinics across the country. So we collect about 40% of the nation's blood supply. We do training. Many people also remember swimming. That was a big thing for a lot of folks, taking swimming lessons, and they were Red Cross, kind of certified classes. CPR, first aid, ED, those sort of trainings. We also do a lot with military members and veterans and their families, helping to support them from the day they enlist all the way potentially to the end of life, through, emergency communications, keeping them connected with their families, helping do trainings about, what is that like? How do you be mentally prepared, either as a service member or a family of a service member? We have international services. So some of our biggest ones, international disaster response. We have specialized staff and volunteers that will deploy to large international disasters. We have a large campaign called the Measles Initiative, which is trying to eliminate measles, where we fundraise and then help provide vaccines in places all across the world. And then we help reconnecting families. So if families have been lost connection with each other due to a disaster or a war situation, and one part of the family is in the United States, we get involved and help try to make those connections so that they can reestablish that contact with their loved one. And then disaster services, which is where we're going to spend most of our time kind of talking this evening. For disaster services for us, we do preparedness, response, and recovery. So that's our kind of full cycle of disaster. In the Wisconsin region, the number one thing that we want to do is residential fires. Fires happen almost 800 times a year in Wisconsin. Floods, though, tornadoes, wildfires, mass casualty events, winter storms, all of those can be disasters that could affect anybody in Wisconsin, at any time. So we are trained and prepared and ready to respond to those disasters. So like I said, last year, and pretty consistently, we respond to over 800 different events every year. Most of those, again, are residential fires, single family, multifamily. Last year, we assisted nearly 1,600 households in those disasters. We are comprised mostly of volunteers, so over 700 volunteers in disaster services. If we're fully staffed, we have 16 paid staff. So paid staff make up about 2% of the total workforce for the Red Cross in Wisconsin. We also do education. So our preparedness activities, we educate adults, and we have youth programs. We get out into schools and after school programs and scouts and different things, and teach kids about disaster preparedness and resiliency and coping techniques. And then we also install smoke alarms. We have different programs, and we get out into different communities, go door to door, go into people's homes, test their smoke alarms, provide fire safety education, and help make them safer should a fire occur. Disaster response for us has many different components, and some of it depends on the size of the event. Is it a single family fire, one individual, maybe one family unit involved, or is it the floods of 2008 and tens of thousands of homes have been impacted? So kind of first thing that kind of guides us is what was the scale of the disaster? How many people are affected? We want to make sure that people have a safe place to stay. So that may involve sheltering, where we actually open up shelters and provide people with a clean, dry place to sleep. It's not glamorous. This is a picture on the screen of one of our shelters in Milwaukee following an apartment fire, set up in a church, kind of in their auditorium, gymnasium space. And this is pretty typical of what a disaster shelter looks like. It is really basics, but what you will find there are Red Crossers and maybe other partners who We'll provide comfort and care, make sure you get meals. If you need, special items for, maybe infants, clothing, those sort of things, we'll help meet those immediate kind of basic needs within the shelter. We also have mental health and spiritual care personnel. So they can work with folks around replacing medications, medical equipment, helping people cope with the disaster, whether that is through kind of mental health or through spiritual care, whatever it is, that folks prefer and what they're comfortable with. We also provide financial assistance, direct financial assistance to our clients, depending on the damage that they have sustained in the disaster. So our financial assistance is based on a disaster-caused need, and that really for us that is, we follow FEMA's disaster assessment guidelines. And so if your home meets the qualifications of being major or destroyed, and for residential fires, if you're going to be displaced for a minimum of 48 hours, that also qualifies, even though it might not technically meet those limits of major or destroyed. You could also be eligible for financial assistance through that. And then we have groups of volunteers that do recovery casework. So every client or household can elect in or out. They're going to get a call, but then they can decide how much they want to work with a caseworker. And that caseworker is really there to kind of help carry folks into the beginning of their recovery and hopefully to a bit more of a stable place for them. They can help provide guidance around working with insurance. Thankfully, most people don't experience disasters more than once, especially in our area. And so a lot of folks just don't know about working with their insurance or working with their landlord, how to get information about when they're going to be able to return, or when they're going to be able to get a security deposit returned to them. Will they be able to get back into their apartment and collect any belongings? How can they do that safely? So we provide a lot of guidance, and then through casework, we also provide referrals. So we work with other agencies in the communities, try to link people up to help kind of cover that gap. One of the things I think we will probably get into a little bit as we start having some more conversation and things is, kind of who are our clients? And really for the Red Cross, everybody. If you have been affected by a disaster, you could be a client of the Red Cross. Everybody from somebody who is homeless, living on the streets, but if they've been impacted by a disaster, they may be eligible for assistance or welcome to come to one of our shelters. To somebody who has stable employment, has a very nice home that they've fully paid for, no mortgage, insured, they could be a Red Cross client. Our assistance, is again based on the damage. But what do we often see, in terms of local events? The folks that will show up and need assistance at our shelters, or that we work with for a longer term after the disaster has happened, are very often low income. They were precariously housed before the disaster, so they might have been doubled up with family or friends. They might have been with, kind of a off the books landlord kind of situation where they don't really have a lease, but they're paying, cash, weekly or monthly. Oftentimes elderly, people with disabilities or medical conditions are often the folks that we see that don't have other options, right? So if we're opening a shelter, it's everybody's choice. Do you want to go to the shelter? Do you have someplace else that you can go stay? So, but oftentimes it is folks that don't have a lot of resources ahead of the disaster that need us the most. they're going to be in the shelters. They're going to be using our casework assistance longer to help them get back on their feet a little bit. One of the things that I did, I think kind of alluded to it, if not straight out said it, but I'll straight out say it here, is everybody's at a different starting point when the disaster happens. But with Red Cross, our financial assistance is again provided on that disaster damage. And so it's provided equally, which might not necessarily be equitable. If I have a fire and need assistance, I'm going to receive the same assistance, the same dollar value in financial assistance as somebody else who qualifies that has a similar household size as me. Even though I might have different resources before the disaster that I can rely on or that I don't have available to me compared to other folks that have been affected. That is definitely, I would say, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the other challenges that we observe when responding locally, but that is probably the first one that I would bring up. It is hard when not everybody has that same starting block. And then what our organization has kind of laid out is a very kind of equal assistance method for folks. We do try to make up as much of the difference as we can through that recovery casework, through referrals to other agencies, but there's still a gap oftentimes that people will experience.
Aretha, is it okay if I pause you right there? You've given us so much great information. And yep, thank you. I was going to ask if you could go back to that slide. Are there questions that participants have now? And I just want to thank you for being transparent about that. Everyone gets the same thing, but then even looking at this graphic, we see how that can be problematic because everyone doesn't need the same thing. Are there questions before we move forward from Aretha? And we'll kind of just do a pause here and then we'll open the floor at the end of the presentation for questions as well. Because she's sharing her screen, I can't see the chat. So I think we'll be okay if you just unmute and ask your question.
Yes, I have a question. A lot of people living in apartments or other dwellings that are tenants will not have, may not have renter's insurance and probably do not have a list of what their household items were, their furniture, their clothing, anything else. How do people, what do they do in those circumstances? How can you help them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And unfortunately, a lot of renters and even homeowners, we'd like to think that insurance is out there and that everybody has it. A lot of people don't. If you've got to make that choice about food or medications versus having insurance that you may or may not need in the future, that becomes a lower priority item. So it definitely makes it harder to recover. If you have renter's insurance, most renter's insurance, if you are, in an apartment or a condo, will cover 2 to 3 weeks, if not more, depending on your insurance, of lodging, right? So you've got 2 to 3 weeks then of hotel stay where you can have your own space. You can kind of, regroup a little bit. You don't have to worry about where am I going to stay in 2 nights. And that's a big thing. So that is some of the coaching that we do, but we also see a lot of folks that do have renter's insurance that just don't know about it. We've had folks, right, a fire might happen in an apartment building. Maybe it's happened on Friday night. So our first kind of layer of response is that we send some folks out to the scene. We get a shelter open because let's say it's 40 people that have been affected. We open a shelter. Some of the folks will go to the shelter. Some will go get their own hotel room. Some will go to family and friends. And then, we're meeting those basic needs kind of over the weekend. We're starting to talk to partners. We're getting ourselves ready for that next phase of issuing financial assistance and starting our casework process with folks. And as we start that process, then maybe on Tuesday or Wednesday and have conversations, there's been folks hanging out at our shelter that had insurance, didn't know what to do with it. And so we start coaching them, contact your insurance, ask them what you're eligible for, what your policy covers, do they need any sort of documents? If you've been in a fire, you might have lost everything. If you don't have your ID now, you don't have your social security card, which you then need to sometimes to get like a replacement ID. All of those become steps in the process that we really just try to work with folks through. So if people have insurance, it's so helpful, but unfortunately a lot of folks don't. Other questions?
Maritha, I have a question. Does the American Red Cross disaggregate their client information by race or age or gender? And are you seeing either more or less need in certain communities?
Yeah, I would say we collect that information if clients want to share it with us, but we don't force anybody to provide that information on race or income, gender. We ask it, and if they provide it, that's fine. What I would say is if you think about it, a lot of folks that are low income are living in housing that might not have, it might predate sprinkler systems. It might, if the landlord isn't top notch, maybe there's not good smoke alarms, maybe the electrical is getting old. So we often see a lot of fires in mobile homes, apartment buildings that house low income or house seniors or house people with disabilities. And I would say just kind of anecdotally, that's what we see. I don't have any like hard data in front of me. Does the rates of fires or other disasters hit? I think, we'll see in some of the videos that later, but we've also talked about this as an organization. There's areas along like the coast, right, where there's low income folks. And last year, there was multiple hurricanes, and 2 hurricanes came weeks apart from each other and hit the same area of Louisiana. That was, largely low income and people of color, tribal lands and things like that. And so, I don't know that I fully answered, but we definitely can see that depending on your housing structure, that's how quickly things will actually ignite, and then whether or not again that electrical is kept up to date. Somebody as simple as our dryers getting maintained, right? Your clothes dryer. We every year we see quite a few fires that start with the clothes dryer, and somebody might not, 1, know that you should clean your dryer vents, 2, might not be physically able to do it themselves, might not have the funds to pay somebody a couple $100 to come out and spend that time getting the dryer vent cleaned out. So there are things I would say that can impact and make it more likely that people of low income, vulnerable communities are affected by disaster.
Thank you. So last call for questions. If not, we will invite Maritha to move on with her presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for questions as well.
I'll ask this question, but if it's better to answer at the end, please feel free to do that. My name is Allison. I was wondering if you know the history at all of the Red Cross decision to do even distribution of funds, and is there conversation about that inside the organization happening?
Yeah, I don't know the full history. I know some bits and pieces, so I'll share what I know. And so the Red Cross is made up of regions and chapters, which is pretty, you know, that happens in a lot of nonprofit and other organizations. And then we have our national headquarters. Originally, as the Red Cross, the American Red Cross was founded, it was chapters that stood up. And so the chapter was that local entity, and would have a board, would fundraise, and that started to create a disparity, honestly, amongst different chapters. Because if you were in an area that didn't have a lot of disasters, but you were able to fundraise really well, then you could provide more to people. If you were in an area that, you know, vice versa, had a lot of disasters, didn't have as many fundraising opportunities, you had to go within your budget, because each chapter had their own, managed their own finances, had their own bank accounts. What you had is what you had, and you had to get from year to year. Some had nice buildings and great donors that were, you know, doing capital campaigns and things like that. And others were trying to keep, you know, their storefront in the shopping mall open. This was very early on in my career, I heard stories about, you know, we were providing several nights lodging, and there were other areas in the country that they could provide one night's lodging because that's all they had the budget for. And so they would provide one night lodging versus, you know, we were lucky in Wisconsin, we could do 3 nights lodging for somebody who had a house fire. Then probably 12-ish, maybe more even years ago, we got a new president and CEO, and Red Cross honestly was having some financial struggles. Like, that's not a good business model when, you know, things are unequal and this chapter might go under and that one's doing really well. And so we consolidated everything. And I think in part of that consolidation and part of bringing everybody under one bank account and one method of doing everything is really when we said, these are the standards. This is what will be provided. We are having conversations at honestly much higher levels than me, but they will sometimes, you know, kind of chat about like what the conversation is. No answer yet. Again, around this, you know, equality versus equity, and how can we make sure that those that are starting out with less might be getting more versus, you know, if you're insured, you might just need that first little help to get going. So the conversations are happening. I have no idea, honestly, how far we might be from potentially making some changes in how we deliver that financial assistance.
Rita, thank you for that. If you go ahead and move forward in your presentation, and then we'll open the floor again for questions at the end.
Great. So just wanted to talk about a couple other challenges that I and other workforce in the Red Cross have noticed locally within Wisconsin, and would not be surprised if this extends, you know, across the country into other areas. We rely on partners for our shelters. So if that's churches, schools, community centers, convention centers, and there are areas where we do not have adequate shelters, and we tried to get, you know, an agreement with a school district or to see what other facilities might be there. But in some areas, unfortunately, that means if we need to open a shelter, we are going to end up busing people, generally not outside of maybe their city, but to a different area. So for instance, in Milwaukee, you know, if we don't have if you're on the north side and we don't have a shelter location that's available to us at that time or at all, we might have to bus you into, you know, central or southern Milwaukee. And that can be pretty disruptive for folks. That's removing people from their neighborhoods. It's making it more of a challenge than if they've got kids that need to get to school. If that's, you know, if they work in the neighborhood where they lived. Now, you know, that's just an added barrier. It's something that we continue to try to work and engage other partners, engage our executives to help us and our boards. But unfortunately, like, that is, you know, one of the issues that we have had responding to some of the local disasters. We want to keep people as close as possible to their neighborhood as long as it's safe, so that it helps probably not speed up, but doesn't slow down their recovery from that disaster. Another thing that we see is partners and partner resources being strained in some locations more than others. A lot of the partners that we refer people to, there aren't that many organizations that just do disaster work, right? Red Cross, Salvation Army has some disaster, but they also run homeless shelters and do other things. So most of the partners that we end up referring people to are the day-to-day kind of social services, human services, food banks, organizations that are running every day, helping folks in the community. And their resources are often very, very tight as it is before the disaster. And now, hey, this apartment fire just happened, or this tornado just hit. Can you help 40 more households? That wasn't really in your plan. They may not have the budget for it. And so what we see is in some cities or some neighborhoods even, depending on what, where the location is, it could vary what partners will come to the table and be available for those clients that we're serving. The other thing I would say that I didn't think about until I actually kind of started this presentation, but the same sort of thing, is the flashier the disaster, the more people that will come out that want to help. You will have more partners, more community members who will come out when they see that a tornado hit versus an apartment fire or flooding. Flooding is kind of an unglamorous disaster. If it's really bad, if they've got, the media's all over it, maybe a little bit more. But if there's a tornado, those are the big ones in Wisconsin that get everybody's attention. If it's hit a community, or even like a mass casualty event, unfortunately, that gets a lot of media attention, and people take notice. So type of disaster could even change what might be available to people in their recovery. And then just a common barrier that I think probably everybody who works with people in some sort of disaster or just housing. The housing shortages that we have started to see over the past years, and then affordability, especially around the affordability of housing. It is really hard when, if you have, even one household, depending on the community, one household that is low income, maybe Section 8 or other subsidized housing, to get a new location. Now, if you have 10, 20, 50, or 100 families that are all looking for those new places to live, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of people, and who do they know, to be able to find those new housing options for folks. So a couple of things, in terms of what can you do to help. I think this conversation is great. Having these conversations, having an understanding of how disaster response works, get involved. Red Cross is always looking for volunteers, but so many other organizations are as well. And you can do episodic even, or you can do more regular, right? These house fires, now is actually the house fire season for kind of winter. We see a lot more fires. And so there's plenty of volunteer opportunities to get trained to be a shelter worker. So maybe it's not, a super regular volunteer opportunity, but when that thing happens, that you're trained and you can show up and work a shift or work, a week at the shelter and help people on that road to recovery. We're always looking for kind of leads on shelter locations. I was going to pull up the Rock County info just to have it in my hand, and I didn't get a chance to do it ahead of this. So I know that we're pretty covered, but we also, we cover a big jurisdiction. I don't know if you have a new convention center necessarily in Beloit, or that this school there's a new school, or maybe there's an old school that's not being used anymore that still being heated and has electricity to it. So if you have any ideas around different shelter locations, things like that, feel free to reach out and we can chat about it more. And then as always, giving blood. If you have the opportunity to give blood, if you're able to give blood, there's such a great need for it. It takes an hour or so of your time, or consider sponsoring a blood drive. And that is also a place where we see, a great need, especially around sickle cell. There is if a person of color, a person with sickle cell can get blood from another Black donor, it is a better match than if they receive it from most white donors or Hispanic donors. And so getting those opportunities out there within your community for blood drives, especially if there's opportunities around the Sickle Cell Initiative, we always appreciate working with folks around those. And I will open up for any additional questions.
Rita, thank you so much. I'll just speak for myself. A lot of new information and a lot of great reminders. I have a couple questions to get us started, and then anyone else, my chat is back open, so feel free to put a question mark in the chat and then I'll know to call on you. As always, if you have a question that you feel might be a little bit sensitive in nature, you can send me a direct message and I'll ask the question without revealing the author. In the information that you shared, you talked about offering spiritual care and you also talked about volunteers. And I'm wondering, same question, but two different areas, like what is the diversity of your volunteer pool? And then what is the diversity of the individuals that are providing spiritual care in those shelters and immediately after disasters?
Yeah, great question. I don't have the stats. It is an initiative that we have in the Red Cross to try to have our volunteer pool match at least the demographics of the area that we serve. So for us within Wisconsin, we are not there yet. Our volunteer demographic leans more white, more retired age than younger folks, and probably more middle to higher income than low income. And so I don't have the exact numbers of what that is. It is something we're definitely always looking to recruit more people of color. We really want people to feel comfortable, right? It's oftentimes just a more immediate comfort level. If you walk into a shelter or the person who shows up on your driveway after a home fire looks like you, right? And so always recruiting for more people. And spiritual care, I would say, probably again, same thing. It's probably leaning white. It's probably leaning more retired. In terms of the demographic, we don't have a ton of people in our spiritual care field. That's one we're recruiting for. It's something we got into a little bit more really just a year or two ago, where we're now offering that as a standard. We used to offer health and mental health to every single client that we had, and now we've added in that spiritual care. So that is a growing group as well. And they're really kind of non-denominational, so they can work with anybody.
Great. And then just one possible lead as far as recruitments, you may want to reach out to Black sororities and fraternities, to churches, to NAACP, urban leagues, LULACs, organizations. I think that may be a wealth of resources to kind of diversify the volunteer pool. Ms. Harrell put in the chat, what is the relationship of Red Cross to Rock River Blood Bank, and does the blood drive in Beloit? Is there a connection there?
I don't know that there's necessarily a direct connection in terms of any of it. There's numerous places. Red Cross, again, we're not the only place to donate blood and that collects it. So I don't know Rock River Blood Bank, but I would assume they've got obviously a very similar mission. And so the biggest thing is to donate. If it's in the pool that can be accessed by hospitals, then it's there if somebody needs it, whether it's from Red Cross or from Rock River or from any agency that collects.
So that's good to know. And just, I have lots of questions. I'll ask another while we're waiting for other questions to come in. If an organization wanted to put together a blood drive, specifically around the sickle cell initiative, or just to have a blood drive in general, who would be the best contact person for that?
Yeah, a starting point could be to give us a call. So the main kind of for this area for blood collection, there's the Madison office, and they dispatch out from there for those drives. So if you call the main number and ask to speak with somebody, or go to the website, or if anybody gets stuck, you know, I can drop my contact information in the chat for folks. I'm happy to take that to make sure it gets to the right person.
Perfect. All right, questions from others? Go ahead and drop a question mark in the chat. If not, we will move on to our next video. Santo, please go ahead and unmute.
All right. I want to thank Maritha for doing this today. And I've been a Red Cross volunteer for the last 11 years. And it's extremely humbling to be a Red Cross volunteer, because you see people at some of the most desperate times in their lives. No one is ever prepared for these disasters. And when we see them in these very needy situations, there, you know, I like her example of equality and equity. We tried to give them all the same opportunities, but not everyone needs the same services, even though the same services are available to all people. So I have found that Red Cross really works at giving people what they need. But I really like the idea that we have mental health services available now, and we also have health services to provide extra supplies that people may need after a disaster. So thank you, Maritha, for sharing that. And for any of you out there who are in this courageous conversation this evening, looking to something to add to your toolbox, we'd love to have more volunteers in Rock County. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, Santo, thank you for serving as a volunteer. Much appreciated. Steve, go ahead and unmute.
Yes, question. Years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, when I was on the county board, I served on the local emergency planning committee, and they were to prepare for disasters and try to coordinate entities, especially first responders, but also have a plan for any toxic disasters that possibly happened and how you cover the impact of those. I assume you're tied in with that, with the local emergency planning committee in some way to try to coordinate responses. Is that so?
Yeah. Yeah, we sit on a lot of those local emergency planning committees. So those are county-based committees for anybody who's not familiar with them, that focus on disaster response, especially around hazardous materials. If you're not aware, there's hazardous materials in large quantities pretty much everywhere you turn. And so that was definitely an eye-opening thing for me that I learned being part of some of those committees. But we collaborate with them. Oftentimes, our main line of collaboration with those is through the emergency management directors. So the county emergency management directors do all sorts of planning with government entities, nonprofit entities, the local emergency planning committees, and such. So, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great, Maritha, thank you for sticking around. In case questions pop up, feel free to join the conversation after we hopefully are able to view the next video. Just a heads up, if for some reason my screen isn't working, I'm going to need one of my Zoom champions to jump in and help me out. We're a community, and that's what we do. I'm going to put the link for the video that we were going to watch next. In the interest of time, we're going to skip ahead. I want to get through 2 additional videos, so we'll put that one in there. It's New Orleans after Katrina, so it's a look back at 10 years after Katrina, kind of what communities were impacted and how they were able to rebuild, and a couple personal stories about what that looked like, what that felt like. So if you are able afterwards, feel free to click on that and to watch. I'm going to share my screen again. And before I start, I want to make sure everyone can see it. So someone unmute and let me know. All right, is everyone able to see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, now the next trick is if you can hear it. So let me go ahead and start.
Residents of Jackson, Mississippi have gone without safe drinking water for weeks.
Hear it.
Heavy
Can't see
rainfall
it. There's no
caused
video.
a failure at the city's water.
Okay, so there's no, all right. Can you see it now?
Yes. Now
Okay.
we can see.
So I just won't maximize the screen, which I apologize, but I want you to be able to see it and hear it.
This water treatment
You
plant.
can see in here.
While water pressure has been restored, the city still lacks clean water. The Navaz has more about how that's affecting everyday life there.
Judy, Jackson's 150,000 residents were already under a boil water notice since July, when the health department found cloudy water that triggered health concerns. The August storms and flooding exacerbated the water crisis, one that continues to this day. This video, taken on Friday, shows brown tap water coming from Molly Minta's home. We spoke with Minta, a local reporter, and other Jackson residents earlier today.
It just feels like a complete mystery what actually caused the brown water coming out of my tap, and who, as like a private citizen, I would appeal to get it fixed. In addition to all of this, to all the mistrust, or rather I should say lack of trust that people are feeling, just the fact that it feels impossible to ascertain why this is happening about something that it should be really easy to figure out.
When I first turned my shower on and it turned brown, I kind of got a little bit scared and I wanted to go home. We have to do extra steps and take extra precautions into brushing our teeth. And that's an everyday life thing. So it should be simple, but for us, it's not simple at all. Personally, for college though, it might get a little bit better considering we have a water tower, but for the city of Jackson as a whole, I don't really see it getting better.
Even here in our cafe, we've had to close the restroom for a couple of days because the pressure was so low that we couldn't even flush the toilet. This is hard because this isn't normal and it shouldn't be normal. And I've heard this has been going on for a while.
Jackson's water crisis is in the headlines now, but other communities, notably majority Black and brown cities, face similar ongoing issues. Joining us now is Robert Bullard, Distinguished Professor of Urban Planning and Environmental Policy at Texas Southern University and the Director of the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice. Professor, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you for joining us. I just want to get your reaction to some of what we heard right there. What does it say to you that residents in a capital city in America for weeks have not had and still don't have clean tap water coming in their homes?
What this says is that infrastructure in many of our cities that have suffered from disinvestment over decades is now coming home. And that it's a result of just systemic flight of resources to outlying areas at the expense of those who are living in our cities.
So today we are focused on Jackson, Mississippi. People will remember earlier this year, we were talking about Benton Harbor, Michigan. A few years ago, we were talking about Flint, Michigan and their water crises. Are these one-off events or do you see something larger? Are these indicative of a bigger problem?
It is indicative of a larger problem. And the problem is basically looking at which communities get resources for infrastructure and which ones get left behind. And cities begin to transition, the demographic shift from predominantly white to predominantly Black or brown, you start to see problems occurring in terms of getting state funding to support infrastructure. And you can see that direct line with not only infrastructure when it comes to water, you can see schools. When the demographics of schools change, you start to see the schools basically decline in terms of lower tax dollars. When it comes to housing and other kinds of infrastructure, which means that we have to make sure that dollars flow in a way that's not based on race, or geography.
So when people hear the phrase environmental racism, is this what we're talking about?
We're talking about environmental racism. We're talking about infrastructure apartheid. We're talking about which communities get left out, left behind. And when you have a red state and with blue cities, it's more difficult for those cities to get resources from the state. It's not just Jackson, it's Texas and other southern states specifically. When you start seeing that flight of white people from the city, you also see that flight of dollars, infrastructure dollars, roads, bridges, dams, water systems, schools. You could name it. Mississippi is rated a D- when it comes to infrastructure. The U.S. as a whole is a C-. So when you talk about water is something you can't live without, and you would hope that a city and state could work together to ensure that its citizens have clean water and other kinds of safe issues that make for quality of life.
Let me ask you about some of those funds then, because there are some federal funds folks are pointing to that say this could help. The state of Mississippi will get about $429 million from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. That's just to fix their water and sewage systems. And even though Republicans voted against it, the city of Jackson is slated to get about $25 million from the American Rescue Plan of last year. What kind of a difference can those kinds of funds make to keep this from happening again?
Well, I think anytime we can invest in infrastructure and have funds flow to need, like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, that money needs to go directly to the city and in some cases county. When it goes to the state, there's a roadblock. And so I think it's important that we somehow dismantle those artificial barriers that keep funds from going to those needed cities.
What kind of a roadblock? What are we talking about there?
Well, it's racial. It's political, it's historical, and it's very powerful when it comes to having a predominantly Black city, 80% Black, trying to get funds from a state that somehow doesn't see it as important. Now, that's a roadblock. That's a barrier. And race is still, if you look at zip codes, still the most potent factor that determines where money flows. And it's pretty obvious that infrastructure dollars over these decades have not flowed into Jackson. And that's a major issue today, but it just didn't happen in the last year. It happened over decades.
Professor, these funds could take many months to make their way into communities. Projects will take a long time to make any kind of lasting change. What about in the short term or the medium term? What can be done to help people in Jackson?
The issue of fast tracking water systems and getting the kinds of treatment facilities online quickly with the urgency of now. I don't think we should go through the usual process. This is an emergency. And I think we're talking about not just water, we're talking about health. We're talking about people's lives. And so it needs to be treated with that sense of urgency and not allow red tape or politics or any kind of artificial barriers to stop this from being fast-tracked.
That is Professor Robert Bullard of the Bullard Center.
So again, I apologize for the weirdness that is happening to my computer, and you couldn't see it if I did the full screen, but hopefully everyone was able to bear with me. And if anyone, you get bonus points if you recognize Dr. Bullard from our previous Courageous Conversations when we talked about climate justice. Same brilliant man providing information. What I found, well, one of the things I found interesting about that clip was the talk about disinvestment and funding for communities that have shifting demographics. And as we look at Rock County, our demographics are shifting. Some of our cities within Rock County more quickly than others. What were some of the takeaways that you found from that video? Another reason why that was selected, Jackson, Mississippi is near and dear to my heart. I did my undergraduate work an hour and a half away. A lot of Black residents in Beloit and throughout Rock County have roots in Mississippi. So that was another reason that video was chosen. I am going to yield the floor. Comments, questions, items that we want to discuss from that video, go ahead and drop a question mark in the chat, please. Holly, go ahead and unmute, please.
Okay, thanks, Amy. That was great to see Dr. Bullard and to know that he's still out there on the front lines. Amazing work. And thinking about accountability, this is my, my question and continuing quandary as I have studied this. I've actually also, Katrina was kind of my entree point to studying environmental justice issues many years ago. And it's such a frustrating thing to see that so many of these communities are still struggling, whether it's Louisiana, you know, the Deep South, or Flint, Michigan, who, you know, they still have no accountability. The courts do not rule in the favor of these communities of color that are in desperate need. Instead, those white flight kinds of issues take the money, take the power out of those communities. So I don't have a question per se. It's just expressing frustration about the never seeming to get accountability for those tragedies that are ongoing.
No, Holly, thank you. And let me broaden it, not just for questions, but for comments and reflections. All of those things are welcome in this space. And we don't have to answer right now. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I think part of the reasons that we come together for these conversations is that we can be reflective. What can we do with the agency that we have to amplify the voice of people who are the most impacted, and who do we reach out to, whether that's legislators, whether that's the news media, how do we bring attention to crises, and what do we demand as a response? All rhetorical questions right now, but I think important things to think about. Santo, please go ahead and unmute.
Sure. I can remember, as I think many of us can, how the media was disproportionately dealing with minority groups as a result of Hurricane Katrina. At that time, we saw people who were leaving stores going into stores that were literally flooded, but they were walking away with what they could get, milk and bread and whatever it may be. And the media was showing white people walking away saying survival, and Black people walking away saying looting. And so, they set the tone to, basically reinforce stereotypes and all these terrible things that happened. And they used the disasters sometimes as an excuse to do that. And to me, I thought that was just so shameful. And, even the people's pets were being transported in these wonderful, big, cushy buses, and people who were socioeconomically depressed and poor and minorities were out on the backs of trucks. So again, talk about disproportionality as a result of a disaster. That just stands out on how the media blows that up and out of proportion. And some of the realities of the poor treatment of these people.
Absolutely, Santo, thank you for bringing up that important point. Anyone else before we move on to our last video for the evening? All right, so let me prep this video for you. It was a little depressing, and maybe my teammates will feel the same way prepping for this discussion. I think it's important content, but one bright spot in that, which I had never heard of before, is called IDEM, I-D-I-E-M, and it's the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management. So what if things could look differently, and how could that impact our residents? So give me a moment. I'm going to pull this up again. I won't try the full screen, but I'll get it as large as I can so you can see and hear it, and we'll go from there.
Hurricane Ida made landfall along Louisiana's southern coast in late August. devastating communities in the bayou of Louisiana's Delta region, southeast of New Orleans.
This is Grand Island. You can see a couple of feet of water. Every single house down there either damaged.
Within a few days of the storm's landfall, the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management deployed equity response teams to monitor recovery efforts for vulnerable and marginalized communities impacted by the storm.
I'm with the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management.
Our teams traveled into the hardest hit regions to meet with survivors.
Thank you so much.
To help solve their challenges.
I love it. Thank you so much. I have elders that need this, like seriously.
A lot of our tribal communities live in and around these coastal areas right here.
And coordinate with partner organizations to mobilize resources to support survivors still in need weeks after the storm's landfall.
Climate change is affecting individuals drastically because they do live along the coast, and because particularly with Ida, their homes were completely destroyed. So what do they have to actually go back to after this storm?
Changing the Stafford Act, absolutely, and other laws that are so focused on eliminating any possible duplication of effort that they really leave so many people in need unserved.
Right. It creates huge gaps of inequity.
It does.
The Stafford Act has to be changed.
It really does. It's not.
It's hurting and causing more harm.
Right.
From day one, it's been pretty bad down here.
We met with tribal leaders representing indigenous populations not federally recognized and facing challenges inhibiting their recovery.
Bialafuge, Banabluxy, Chitimaches, as well as Illusion Shawls, Grand Kaidulak, and Cornish Indian tribe. We're all state-recognized tribes. We've been pursuing federal recognition since '96, and it's a long, drawn-out process.
Is the response slower in this area from the state or federal government?
We met with individuals who were elderly, poor, and still in need of support from responders.
There has not been a fire department. We have not had police come back here. We have had nothing come back here. And like I said, I called 911 twice for this elderly gentleman, and I can't get no one to rescue this man.
We met with emergency managers to amplify the work in supporting underserved members of the community.
We know there's going to be some folks that need some of these resources that don't have the means to get out on their own, or don't have even the means to post on evacuate. So what we're doing is providing these resources to our residents and ensuring they could be self-sustainable until we get the power restored or we get some additional state and federal resources to come in.
Our equity response teams continue collaboration with partner nonprofits to provide resources for unmet needs and to limit the impacts of future storms. We are identifying resilience needs for the most vulnerable communities in this region to help mitigate for future disasters.
When emergency managers and responders are thinking of policies, thinking of ways to be more equitable, I hope that they understand it's about real people.
If you invest in the coastal communities for resiliency and adaptation and you provide those funds, okay, instead of having to get there and constantly rebuild structures because they're not suited for the environment that they live in, you know, having to ship people hours away from their homes, right? And they can't even get to work. They can't be with their families. They can't, I mean, there's multiple issues that if that funding was provided for the projects that we've been working on planning, we could really take care of a lot of those issues.
We are IDEA, meeting the needs of the most vulnerable and promoting fair and equitable response in disasters.
All right, so thank you again for bearing with me and this screen. I'm gonna go ahead and put a couple links in the chat, one for that third video in case you wanna watch that again or share that with anyone. But if we are so inclined to reach out to our legislative representatives, it could be, what about a program like IDEUM? Is that something that we could pattern here in Wisconsin, or is that something that discussions are being held around? That may be a good starting point And I will also put in the chat the homepage for the organization if you're interested in additional information. The other thing that I'm going to include in the chat is the Stafford Act was referenced in that last video. So that is the actual link where you can go and read the act. It's pretty lengthy. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act was signed on November 23rd, 1988, which amended the Disaster Relief Act of 1974. The act constitutes the statutory authority for most federal disaster response activity, especially when they pertain to FEMA and FEMA programs. And as I was reading through some of that, it seems like there are some objections to Section 404 with funding. And so that basically outlines that federal government money be used to relocate people, to protect undamaged buildings, or to stimulate future planning. So those are all great things. I think we would all agree to that. But the problem, as some see it, is that you have to be impacted by a disaster before those 404 funds can be released. And you can see the woman in the video in the striped shirt, which really gave a beautiful segue for this discussion. If we could get that money for vulnerable areas up front, to fortify structures for natural disaster prevention, things like securing the electric grid in Texas and in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico at this point, I think it just needs to be rebuilt. I'm not sure that it can be repaired because of the number of storms that have hit it and because of the lack of work that has taken place on that electrical grid prior to these storms hitting. But using that money, if it could have been used in Benton Harbor and Flint, Michigan and Jackson, Mississippi, to prevent the precarious situations that those residents find themselves in now. So definitely something of interest to look at if this is a subject that you are interested in learning more about. I'll also put one other article in the link as kind of my final drop. And it says, what is the Stafford Act and why we might be making disaster relief worse? So again, if you're interested, feel free to drop to take a look at that link. I hopefully am going to stop talking. I'm going to yield the floor. If you have a question, a comment, or reflection, please go ahead and put a question mark in the chat and I will know to call on you. All right, we will hear from Maritha and then Holly.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and about the infrastructure. And I just wanted to bring up a piece, as you mentioned, in Puerto Rico, the whole electric grid is so bad. Sometimes after disasters happen and Red Cross and other entities are able to fundraise, if we can fundraise a lot of money that kind of meets the basic needs of folks, we may be able to do extra projects. So one of the things that we did do after Hurricane Maria was work with the schools in Puerto Rico, which often served as their shelters, and had solar panels put on the schools. And they did actually, after this most recent hurricane, turn out to be very effective, that most of the schools were able to function then as shelters and have at least some minimal power for folks. But it isn't the end, it can't be the end all be all to rely on, organizations that are relying on the donated dollar to be able to fund these kind of necessary projects. And when you think about replacing lead pipes and, decaying dams and electrical grids, that so much money is going to be involved. That it's a huge problem that will need to be tackled by many, many.
No, Maritha, thank you so much for injecting that into the conversation. Holly, if you don't mind. So I was at an unrelated conference this morning, and one of the notes that I took is that the role of government is to be the trusted, neutral convener to provide capacity and resources. And is that where we find ourselves? So like you said, it can't just be on the backs of a nonprofit or a volunteer or service organization to get these types of projects going. But I would say that that's really the role of an effective government, to be the trusted, neutral convener to provide capacity and resources so we can tackle these human need crises that need to be addressed, that we would hope would not be political at all. All right, Holly, please go ahead and unmute.
Okay. Yeah, that point about we hope we hope for that, right? And I try to maintain hope, but some days better than others. I also put something in the chat about the Lowlander Center for people interested in Louisiana and the bayous, where those indigenous tribes are from, those state recognized versus federally recognized tribes. The Lowlander Center is the group that I have been in touch with for many years. They worked with all of those tribes. 10 years, they worked on an amazing sustainable development program, and they actually submitted it to the federal government. They won $46 million to resettle because of climate change and the rising seas and the fossil fuels destroying their island. And unfortunately, what happened, people were really excited in 2016 when they won that. The state of Louisiana, right? That message in the video about the state kind of coming in and really disrupting things. The state of Louisiana, instead of following this incredibly green and sustainably oriented program plan, the state just kind of built a cheap housing project, and it's such a tragedy. It's higher ground, so they're not literally drowning, but it's one of those corruption issues. And so we have this government which could be doing amazing things, but so often it's diverting funds into corrupt means, and we have to hold them, we have to raise awareness about it. Disappearing the fastest place on the planet. It's literally disappearing really fast, and people are impacted very much. So I'm grateful that we're talking about it tonight. Again, I get carried away with not much questions, but responding anyways. Thank you, Amy.
Holly, there is definitely room for that in these courageous conversations, and I appreciate what you add to the discussion. Thank you to everyone who has dropped resources in the chat. That's another thing that I love about courageous conversations. You get to watch the videos and have the discussions, but also tangible resources we can walk away with if we want to dissect that further and then follow up and take action. So we have found ourselves at 6:52. The time kind of rolled by pretty quickly. Again, thank you for sticking with me through some technical oddities. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a distraction with small screen, little screen, no screen at all. Again, those links are in the chat, so feel free to go ahead and watch or rewatch those videos. I have a couple announcements. The first one, hopefully many, if not all of you are aware, the registration has opened for the YWCA Rock County 8th Annual Racial Justice Conference. We are so excited about our lineup. We made a couple adjustments. We're going to add a wrap-up session at the end because we have such amazing content. We want to give people opportunities to kind of debrief and to have those casual conversations that we would typically have, over lunch at the conference. We are again virtual this year. The information is in the chat. Early registration ends on October 28th. So that's this Friday. The early registration rate is $100. Regular registration, which will begin at midnight on Saturday morning, is $125. If you know of a student that you want to help get registered, the student rate is $50. Doesn't matter when they register, they'll just have to confirm that they're a student through their email address, and we would love to take care of that. The link is there if you want to purchase tickets on the website. If you want to be invoiced or pay by credit card over the phone or send a check, feel free to call our main office and Danielle is going to take great care of you. If you are associated with one of our sponsors, we have so many wonderful sponsors again this year, which we're so grateful for their support. There is a reduced ticket rate. And I like to say that because sometimes what happens is if I'm affiliated with a sponsor organization, but I get excited, the registration is open, I go and pay full price. If you are connected to one of our sponsors, and you can verify that through email account, then there are discounted ticket rates. So please make sure you check into that before you purchase the ticket. I want everyone to come, but I want you to get the best deal possible. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, you feel free to reach out to me at my work email. And then the other, I'm so excited the YWCA Rock County again is taking the lead in organizing the Dr. MLK Jr. commemoration. We're simply taking the lead, but there are so many wonderful community organizations that are coming together. Our school districts, our local nonprofits, individuals that are serving on that committee. So definitely a county-wide, community-wide affair. We are going to be back in person this year, which we're very excited about as well. This next year's commemoration is going to take place on Saturday, January 14th, 2023. So mark your calendars, save the dates. We're going to start at 2 p.m., which is a little bit earlier than we typically start. We typically start at 3. And the reason we're doing that is we typically get hit with nasty weather on this date. So we want everyone to arrive safely. We want you to be able to get back to your destination before it gets dark. We're going to be back at Black Hawk Technical College. So in the same building, but slightly different location. We won't be in the back commons area. There is a new renovated area up front, which is going to be great for any of our participants that have mobility concerns. All right, Diversity Action Team, any announcements? All right, Julie, any announcements from Community Action?
Yeah, the Wisconsin Help for Homeowners program had briefly closed. It's now accepting applications again. This program is for overdue housing related bills. It's expected to be available until the end of the year or as long as funding lasts. And so people can access this on Community Action's website.
Sounds great. All right. Any final questions? Maritha, thank you so much for presenting. Thank you for staying around. Much appreciated. You gave us so much to think about. We have a couple minutes left. If there are any final questions that you would like to ask Maritha before we open the parking lot, which is unrecorded, unmoderated, in case anyone wants to continue the conversation there.
Hey, Amy, this is Heidi. It's not really a question, but I just wanted to let our speaker know. Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks so much for being on the call tonight. That was so informational. Appreciated it so much. But I do know that in Dane County, the United Way has done a lot of work with trying to increase the equity of volunteers. And they have several new programs that they're offering now to build upon diverse volunteers. But they've also done a lot of analysis, so they might have some really good information to share with you as you go down that road. Just wanted to put that out there.
No, perfect. I always want to connect people in our meetings to resources, so much appreciated. All right, well, I'm not going to hold you. We will end a couple minutes early. I will end the recording.